Dave Rogers. I'm a policy advisor with the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont. This is another in a series of conversations we've been having with folks about policy issues related to organic agriculture and food system in general. And today we will be taking a look at a subject that a lot of people have questions about and don't fully understand, and that is how organic standards and regulations are developed and how they sort of how they guide the production and manufacture of organic foods. And I'm very pleased to have today someone who is very well positioned to talk about all this, Dr. Jean Richardson. Jean is a retired professor of natural resources at the University of Vermont, a former farmer and presently a maple producer with her children, organic, and also an inspector for Vermont Organic Farmers. Vermont Organic Farmers is a program of NOFA Vermont that inspects farms and food manufacturers to ensure compliance with these organic standards. And also recently, as of just a couple weeks ago, named to the chair position at the National Organic Standards Board, which is a USDA board that is charged with developing organic standards, and we'll talk more about this in a few moments. So welcome, Jean.
Nice to be here.
So let's just, for folks who may not be clear about what we're talking about when we're talking about organic standards, what are some basic principles of organic standards, or what are some, what are we talking about when we're talking about organic standards?
Well, I think there's two main components to think about. One is the system of the farm or the processing business. But for thinking of the farm, there are things like there's pasture standards. All the cows have to be outside and have access to the out of doors for so many months of the year and rotated through pastures like that. And then the other aspect of it really relates to the substances that you can use, because in organic agriculture, you're not supposed to be using any synthetics except for the limited number that's on what's called the national list. And in the same way, when you're making a product, you're making cookies, organic cookies, you can only use the substances that are legally allowed to be used in those products. So we're looking at systems and substances.
So you mentioned the grazing standard,
Right.
pasture rule. If, for example, certified organic dairy cattle will have to be out grazing, exhibiting natural behaviors, and
Yes.
not in intensive confinement situations.
Right.
And that's a basic principle of organic production.
That is correct, and it's that way for all livestock. All livestock, whether it's chickens or pigs or llamas, whatever it is, they have to be outside, they have to be allowed to do their natural behavior. So chickens are supposed to be outside running around in pasture, and so the cattle, so that they can mimic their natural life as far as possible. And of course, for things like organic cattle, this really improves the quality of both the meat and the milk, as we know from good scientific research.
Yes. And so the other thing that is so essential is attending to the soil and its health.
Yes, right.
And so maybe you can talk a little bit about what essential part soil, handling soil, producing soil, caring for soil plays in organic standards.
Yeah, taking care of the soil, good stewardship, that is the primary underlying principle of organic agriculture. So rather than have the farmer think I'm producing milk, say the farmer, really what you're trying to do is take care of the soil, and maybe just you're producing grass over the soil to protect that soil and to improve its quality over the years.
And so the soil, so no synthetic pesticides,
Right.
herbicides,
Right.
these kinds of things.
All of those things.
Okay, so that's a couple of examples. And then in food manufacture, there are so many substances. If you look at the ingredient
Right,
label
right.
on processed foods, if it's a certified manufactured product, you can be sure that all of those ingredients are organic.
When you have there are 3 different labels that they have in the United States. You can either have a product, carrots, for example, that are 100% organic, and they can say 100% on the label. Or it'll say organic, and that means that if it might be like the cookies I was talking about, it can have 5% up to 5% of the ingredients, the substances in it, can be non-organic if there's nothing else that can be used.
A minor ingredient or two that is not available in organic form that would be approved because it's on the national list and has been examined and vetted by the
Yes, you can
National
have
Organic
up
Standards
to
Board.
5% can be non-organic. But just because it's non-organic, again, doesn't mean it can be GMO, and it doesn't mean it can be something that's harmful to human health.
Yeah, we get questions from people wondering if any GMOs are allowed and if that
Right.
non-organic fraction could have any GMOs, and it's absolutely prohibited.
Yes. And then there's a third category called made with organic. But they can't use the made with category of products. They can't use this label, this USDA label on it. But the other two categories can do.
So, Jean, it occurs to me that consumers have a lot of choices. They go in the supermarket and they see labels of all sorts, fair trade, natural, organic, certified humane. What is it that sets the USDA, this organic certified label? What does it represent? How does it sort of compare to these other labels?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and it is complicated, and I think people do get confused. I think that if you're in Vermont, you're going to be looking for either the Vermont Organic Farmers seal, but more specifically and much easier to find is the USDA seal. That's this one, this USDA Organic Green Seal. That gives you the verification that what you're looking at is organic. And it clearly is intended to differentiate it from those words like natural or pasture raised.
Because there are no standards.
Pasture raised is not does not mean it's organic. Alone, it has to have the seal. And if it says natural, well, arsenic is natural. I mean, so natural is not something that goes through a certification process. So that word doesn't really mean anything.
So this label really represents and certifies that these standards have been used in the production of whatever it is that the product bears this label.
They're a guarantee of organic integrity that shows up. So that organic seal, especially the USDA one actually, is the most critical one for a consumer to be looking for when they go and buy a product.
We have these standards, we have expectations about how farmers and food manufacturers will carry on and produce their product. How can we be sure that they are complying with these standards? How is it that how are they inspected? What's the enforcement sort of mechanism?
Okay, well, I might start with the rule.
Okay.
So there's a federal law that was passed. In fact, our own Senator Leahy and then Representative DeFazio of Oregon were the two leading people in Congress in 1990 that wrote and after much discussion passed the Organic Food Production Act. So we have a law that came into place in 1990, and then once you write a law, you then have to write the regulations. And so the regulations were written. And those regulations are what give us the rules that we have to follow as we begin to understand what is going on the farms. And that law, at the same time, it created the National Organic Standards Board. And I'm a member of that 15-member board. And that board is charged with looking at all those substances that can or cannot get added to in that 5% category. Are those good things to use, those synthetics? Is it okay to use them? It's only that national volunteer board that can put things on that list. And so you've got the organic law and the National Organic Program with the National Organic Program's regulations and then all the substances that on the national list that the board then looks at.
So, the Organic Food Production Act was passed in 1990. It established the National Organic Program within the USDA.
Yes.
Part of that was to develop this NOSB board to really ride herd on these questions of substances and what would be approved practices. And then, so we have a body of regulations that have been developed. And so what happens then? We have these regulations.
Right. Well, then what they set up was they said you could have certifying agencies all over the country. And there are about 90 or so certifying agencies right across the country. And each of these agencies, and the Vermont Organic Farmers, VOF, which is part of NOFA Vermont, that VOF is one of those agencies. And those agencies hire inspectors. They're not employed by the agencies because they're third-party inspectors. And those inspectors, people like myself, go out to the farms and to the businesses, and we verify. Our job is to verify the system and the substances.
So
on
you
all
poke
the
around
farms.
and look.
Poke around. You open cupboards, even if the farmer or the processor didn't say you could go in that cupboard. So you go in the cupboard and you look and see, what do they have in there? Is it okay to use it?
And you examine their records as well?
Yes, you look at all of their records. All producers, organic, have to keep all of their records and available to the inspector for 5 years on all the issues and all the substances, all of their records and receipts have to be available.
Receipts.
And they're looked at in all the receipts. They're looked at in minute detail to verify that the consumer can have confidence in that.
So when we say
seal.
no GMOs in organic production, the way this is verified is
exactly.
a farmer buying a product, for example, let's say it's feed.
Yes.
He or she would have to have a legal document from the company that they purchased the feed from.
Exactly.
And all the way back to the seed, there would be this trail of legal paperwork.
Exactly, yeah.
All right.
So there's a specific document. It's called a non-GMO declaration, for example. So for all of your seeds and for everything, and that has to be signed and on file, and you get inspected every single year. Everywhere in the world, organic people get inspected once a year.
By a third party.
By a third party
And that's the key, isn't it? There's no conflict of interest there.
That's right. It's a third party verifier.
And so if a farmer or a food manufacturer is found to be out of compliance, violating some of these, what happens?
Right. Well, the inspector doesn't make that determination of non-compliance. We say, oh, you don't have the record for showing us what kind of compost you used, or you don't have the record that shows us the certificate of the farm on which those carrots were grown, which we need a certificate, because everybody gets a certificate for any product that's being produced. You don't have this, so you write it down, and then you send it back into the certifying agency. And it's the certifying agency and their review board that determines whether or not it's a major non-compliance or just a minor record-keeping issue that could be
So
addressed.
it might be, just a sort of a letter that says, hey, you've got a problem with this, please fix it by the time we, or you may come around in 6 months and check and make sure you...
Or improve your records.
Or it could be a flagrant violation, in which case they would lose their certification.
That is correct, and there is the ongoing ability and a process, a democratic process, whereby the farmer, or the food processor, they're making those chocolate chip cookies and they made some errors, and if they've been shown to do it on purpose, then there's a process where they're told you're going to take those products off the market, and an investigation takes place, and then they may lose their certification unless they can, or they may have to pay a fine. And so the enforcement takes place at the federal level. The federal inspectors will look at the materials or come out to the farm or the business and verify that they've either improved and therefore they keep their certification, or that in fact they lose their certification.
So it's a whole system of creating an oversight sort of function at the local level, and then actions are taken.
And checks
higher
and balances.
Yes.
Oh, and we also do residue testing. That was in the original law of 1990, and they've only relatively recently really been pushing to encourage that to take place nationwide. Because if we do periodic, unannounced residue testing to make sure there's no antibiotics, because there's no antibiotics either in organic agriculture.
Thank you for
that. There's no antibiotics in the milk, for example, or that there's no GMO corn or soybeans being used in the fields. Then you can do residue testing for these to verify again that so the consumer can have confidence in the organic seal.
So some samples would be taken, sent off to a laboratory,
That's right.
and then we would know
Yes.
whether or not there was
Yes.
really what was going on.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about the board and how it's structured and how it functions. And
Okay. There are 15 volunteer members of the National Organic Standards Board. There are 3 consumers, 4 farmers, 3 environmentalists, 3 handler processors, 1 scientist, and 1 certifier. And as I keep repeating, they're all volunteers. The job takes about 12 hours a week, 12 months of the year of time, because you've got conference calls and written documents that you're dealing with all the time, plus handling public input. Because not only are we a board that looks at all of these substances to determine if they should be used in organic agriculture or not, but we also have to take input from all the stakeholders across the nation. So we are like we're like the public receiving body. So we get public comments both in writing and verbally, and then people will call us from all over the country with questions and tell us what it is that they want and don't want in terms of organic. So we are very busy and try to build alliances and cooperation between very divergent stakeholders, because of course organic has changed considerably since
Yes.
1990.
there are a lot of stakeholders with different interests,
Right.
and different scales. Very large companies
Exactly.
have organic foods now,
Yeah.
and smaller farmers.
Right.
And I know from having attended meetings twice a year, then the NOSB meets at some place in the country, and there's a 3 or 4 day meeting, and tremendous public comment and input and just hashing things out, and it's kind of exciting and frustrating
It is.
sometimes
It's
too,
both.
right?
It's both. Yeah, because the interests of the huge food processing companies are different from those of a tiny little 10-acre vegetable farm, and so those scales of difference are really very real things. And we only have one standard, so to speak, one size fits all, and it is an uncomfortable mix in some ways.
Yeah. Seems like over the years, since the law was passed, standards have been developed, they're being talked about, new ones are being implemented, gaps are being filled in terms of what needs to be included in regulations. And it's, I know in organic agriculture we say it's the first principle is one of continual improvement.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what are some of the challenges that the board is facing? What are some standards that will have to be addressed in the near term and longer term perhaps? What are some challenges that
Well, there's
you face
a
on the
number of
board?
things going on, and in large part it is because the industry is growing so fast. The Farm Bill was just recently passed, and in that Farm Bill, Senator Leahy, through his work and the work of obviously others, like the representative from Michigan, Detroit area, played a major role, has got everything they wanted in that Farm Bill for organic, and that was really pretty impressive. That means that for the first time, the National Organic Program will get a large number of new staff and more money to do the things that need to be done to meet all the new demands on organic. Because one of the things that's happened over the last few years is that many of the recommendations that have come out of the National Organic Standards Board, they haven't been able to carry them out because they haven't had the staff and the personnel to do the work. So they have a backlog. One of the backlogs is hydroponics. The National Organic Standard Board made a recommendation a number of years ago that if it wasn't soil-based, that it could not be certified organic, and that is still the feeling of the board. And yet the NOP has done nothing about that because it hasn't had that time, other staff, to actually further explore that, clarify it, and then put out the guidance that say you can't have, which is what I hope they'll do. You could have aquaponics under the NOSB recommendation, but not hydroponics.
So
being
hydroponics is
certified.
the growing of crops without any soil at all.
Correct.
Simply using
Right.
a nutrient solution.
Yeah, just a water with lots of chemicals added to it.
And it does seem to violate that basic principle
It
of
does seem
soil
to. It does seem to, yes.
as being central
Yes.
to organic. So that's an issue that is...
That's an issue that's bubbling and that should come up this year. The other one is aquaculture, a very huge political issue. There's apparently some demand for fish farmed that is organically certified. And so we were asked to vote on substances at this last meeting.
Yes.
And in the end, they all went back to the subcommittee because we were unable to actually find out if anyone needed these. That was one of the reasons. Plus, the National Organic Program hasn't generated the rules, hasn't had the time or the resources to promulgate how the fish would be managed on the net
Yes.
pens or on land.
So some of these are open water
Yes, net pens out in the ocean.
to grow
Right.
carnivorous fish, salmon,
Yeah.
and some people have described that as basically factory farms in the
Right,
water.
like factory farms.
And so one of the important considerations in approving any such
Yes.
practices is effect on the environment.
Right.
And the point is made vigorously by environmental groups that you really, as presently conducted, this kind of open net fish farming is not good for the environment,
Right.
and should not be allowed.
But of course, we don't know what the rule is, the new regulations are going to say. So we really can't do anything about this issue until the regulations are
Right,
promulgated. And
right,
I think
right.
that's another year away.
Yeah, it is. It is
Yeah.
a hot issue. I mean, it's an example of the growth of organic.
Yeah.
Companies know that if they put an organic product out there, there is a growing number of consumers who will buy it. There's a price premium in the marketplace.
Yes.
And so everyone would like to get as much organic product as possible out there, but the point gets made, well, sometimes you may not be able to have everything organic because you can't solve these,
Right.
you may not be able to solve these environmental problems, for example. So it's a
Yes.
real
It's
tug there.
It's a very complex issue, and I don't really know where it's going to go for organic aquaculture in the U.S. They have it in Europe, but it'll be very interesting to follow.
One thing we haven't talked about, and it's important for people to realize, is, of course, a good deal of our organic foods and products come from elsewhere globally.
Oh, yes, right, yes.
Globally, and so the question, very good question, is how do we know that those products, even though they may bear the USDA label, how do we know that they've been produced in compliance with all of these standards? So how is that handled?
That's a good question. Well, the answer is in several ways. So it may be that the farm in Central America growing the coffee is in fact certified to the NOP standard, and that someone like the California certifying agency goes down and they do the inspections. So it has that certifying agency seal on, as well as the federal seal under the National Organic Program. But it could also be that they have equivalencies. So for example, the United States has equivalency agreements with Europe, the European equivalencies. So we say that, and that's been done on a memorandum of understanding, that with a few exceptions, that all of the products that are being certified to European standards meet the National Organic Program
So
standards.
they can put that USDA label on it?
Yes, and they can come into the country under equivalency agreement.
All right. So, and I know there's been a lot of work in recent years to make sure that that whole system is harmonized and enforced properly.
And we're developing the same thing with Japan now, and some South American countries. There's all kinds of international agreements in progress.
Yeah, not surprising. So, what else? I mean, we've just scratched the surface here.
Well, if you want to get down into the political problems that we're having right now, is that in the last 18 months, the National Organic Program has made some radical changes to both policies and procedures that are followed under OFPA, under the Organic Food Production Act. These involve what's called sunset is one of the things whereby every 5 years we have to relook at all of the synthetic substances that are on the national list to determine if they should stay on the list or come off the list, if they're a good replacement.
This is the idea of continual improvement. If
Yes, right.
You've made an allowance
for a period of time.
But it's not forever.
Right. And so, but the government has now made a change to say that things won't automatically fall off the list in 5 years, but in fact they'll stay on the list, and you have to vote to delist them instead of letting them sunset and then putting them back on if you think that there's no other replacement. So this is a fairly major change which is causing a great deal of angst nationwide by a wide range of groups of all levels, and they've also taken all the policies and procedures which the Volunteer Organic Standards Board would deal with and take public comment on. They've taken those all back into the agency, and so therefore we now, the USDA, so therefore now we have no control over those either. So
it's a
Senator
time of...
Leahy is looking into this.
Well, you know, it's amazing how often we have occasion to give thanks that Senator Leahy represents us.
That's right, absolutely.
Senator Leahy was instrumental in getting the Organic Food Production Act passed. He refers to himself sometimes as the father of the organic food production.
Oh, the Godfather, I think.
The Godfather. Maybe the farmers were the fathers or something.
Yeah, that's right.
And he is paying attention to all of these challenges and difficulties and political struggles, and helping to ensure that the original vision of the act and the integrity of the label are protected.
Yes, and he's also looking at hydroponics as well right now.
Right. So the challenge at these NOSB meetings, I saw it from the very beginning, was, okay, so you have large companies, food companies, that can send people to these meetings every year and really have a strong voice, but smaller farm organizations like ours and others have difficulty attending these meetings and having a budget to do so. So, but it's so critical that everybody shows up.
Yeah. I must say, if there's anybody out there that's even vaguely interested in attending a meeting, you should let someone know that you would like to go to the meeting, and contact, for example, for Vermonters, contact the Vermont organic farmers and say, I'd be interested in going, how do I go? And because there are some organizations that will actually pay the way for smaller farmers or to go to the national meeting.
It's critical.
Or at least where to send in your written comment or how to send in oral comment so that your voice can be heard. Because what we miss particularly, I think, are medium-scale farmers coming to the meetings or even telling us what it is that their interests or concerns are.
If you have questions about certification, organic standards, or anything like this, you can go to our webpage. You'll find actually, the standards listed. If you have questions about anything that's come up here, certainly get in touch with the office, and we'll be very responsive, and we can put you in touch with Jean as well. Certainly. If you really want to get into the weeds on
I'm
these
happy
things.
to take emails. Yes.
And thank you, Jean, very much.
That was my pleasure.